So the question is, how likely is it that we'll see the emergence of, and I use the word significant, new players providing business banking services? Come on, let's start with you, Jason.
Well, I'd like to think Metro will definitely fit that category, Huw.
Do you work for Metro, Jason?
I do indeed.
Oh, right.
I do indeed. Yeah. But we're well on the path, so we'd like to see an awful lot more competition. Yeah. I think there's something inherently unhealthy with 5 players having an 85% share. Clearly the level of innovation is stymied because the motivation to disrupt is a lot less. So, you know, we want to see more competition. I think competition will stimulate innovation. There is a degree of inertia at the moment because people kind of think, well, they're all as bad as each other. You know, we're really going to transfer our account. So the more competition, the better as far as we're concerned, and it can't come soon enough.
Go on, Omar. What's this landscape going to look like, do you think?
So I think competition, when you look at competition, it takes a number of forms. So yes, you can look at it through the lens that says 5 banks, etc. But the commercial market, the SME market is significantly intermediated. There are a lot of brokers in the game. They provide, I would argue that they provide some competition, or certainly where they're placing their business. There are alternate sources of financing that are emerging for the big companies. There's an increasing amount of private placements. There's an increasing move to the US model of bond issuance at that level. When you come down to medium-sized and SME businesses, you now have peer-to-peer lending, crowdfunding, asset finance is a growing part of the financial services makeup. So when you look at competition, I think it would be remiss of us just to look at it through the lens of where does a SME or medium-sized company take its current account from. That's the first point. The second point is my bet is that over the next few years we will see 10 to 15 new entrants in the UK market, all operating at different levels, different sizes, and in different spaces in the market. And indeed, as well as having my fellow panelists bank having launched over the last couple of years, we've had a number of others. So there is a number of things happening that I think will mean that over the next 3 to 5 years, we will see a richer tapestry within our financial services market in the UK.
Rob, it's a healthier environment?
I'm way more cynical. There's been changes right through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and you know, my research covers all that time, and there's always these hits to the market, and there's always these shocks to the markets, and there's always the rhetoric in the press that we're going to break up this 85%, this 80%. It's happened throughout, as I say, every decade, and funnily enough, we end up looking pretty similar to we did in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and I think I'd love to see more banks, and I'd love to see more competition, and I think we'd solve a lot of the problems we've been discussing tonight if that was the case. There just seems to be something unique about bank operations and asset liability management and relationships with the government and the riskiness of banks and economies of scale that mean that you end up with 5 or 6 large banks, and most large Western-style capitalist economies end up with these dominant banks, and it's very hard to shake.
Okay. Slightly more optimistic, Phil?
Well, I think we've had 2 great answers there, actually. What more can I add? I think the fact that 600 branches coming out of Lloyds Banking Group to become TSB only makes it the 8th biggest player in the market has got to be a worry, because it just shows how.
Could I just look at the banks that all the building societies that then converted into banks? What happened to them all? All of them, essentially over the years, were picked off.
We're picked off, absolutely,
and we are where we are.
Yeah, and so a nice little intro to my next point, actually, which was the Nationwide. So Nationwide had aspirations. They've been a successful funding for lending model. They had aspirations to enter the business market. They've now pulled back, saying it's going to be 2016 at the earliest. Things like that going on worry me. The fact that neither RBS nor Lloyds could sell the branches under the obligations of state aid, worries me. The positive, more optimistic, we have got Metro, Handelsbanken, Aldermore. I think Virgin would clearly like to do a little bit more. And probably on the most optimistic side, caveating that with saying the business bank isn't going to solve any of this, by the way, The more optimistic side, I think, is probably moving to players on a regional basis. So more aligned to the Sparkassen model within Germany, where there will be regional lenders working with regional equity and growth funds to create that mixed portfolio of lending, which should support more sustainably the business that have an appetite to growth.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually think that basically we will see much more competition, and I think that we are underestimating the role of the new players. Just think of the music industry. I have on several occasions been defense witness in court cases defending service providers or file sharers of music. And this is back to 2005, 6, 7, up to 10. They're still happening, but less so. And the key is that the whole media industry was shaken, music, publishing, newspaper, etc. Banks are facing exactly the same thing, new technology and the role of networks effects, the role of actually, the peer-to-peer lending. We have seen like Funding Circle has been growing fast. Of course, we cannot compare it with big banks, but still, all of a sudden, we will get these new service providers who are taking advantage of new ways in which relationships are made, and the next generation, the next entrepreneurs, they grew up with Facebook and LinkedIn and the internet and file sharing, and they have a complete different attitude to the way in which services are done. So I think that yes, we are still it will take a long time, but all of a sudden, some of these big banks, and they are also now trying to innovate themselves, but clearly there's going to be much more competition, and we will see, we might still end up with a few big banks as well, but it may not be the same ones.